Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast. Folks, we have with us today returning Kimberly Begg, author, attorney, speaker. Kimberly is the Director of Programs and the General Counsel at the Ortner Foundation. We've talked a lot on the Anchored Podcast about Michael Ortner. He's a member of the board of directors here at CLT. We're a big fan. And Kimberly is also the project advisor for Run with Saints. And so if you are in your 20s or 30s looking to connect with other passionate Catholic, Run with Saints is a great resource to check out. Kimberly, welcome back to the Anchor Podcast.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Jeremy.
So, Kimberly, Chelsea Niemick had you on the Anchor Podcast maybe a year or two ago. And so we'll put that in the notes for folks to go back and listen to as well. This conversation today, we're really going to be focusing on a book that I just devoured. I was on a flight to Spokane last week and there and back. Couldn't put it down. I was hoping to sleep, but it was honestly too good. It was honestly too good to sleep. The book is Unbreakable: How Saints Inspired Other Saints. Is that the right subtitle?
It's Unbreakable: Saints Who Inspired Saints to Moral Courage.
Saints Who Inspire Saints to Moral Courage. And you focus on three saints in this book. Kimberly, I'm wondering if we could start off and just hear a little bit about kind of the origins of this idea. When did you first start thinking about writing a book? And it sounds like maybe something that you hadn't done before. Is that right?
This is my first book. While I've always enjoyed writing, I never really thought that I would be writing a book. It very much feels like the work of the Holy Spirit. But I guess the way that this particular project came about, a few years ago, I gave a presentation to a group of high school and college students for Young America's Foundation. And I was talking about one of my favorite heroes, Blessed Jerzy Papiuszko. If you're not familiar with Father Jerzy, he was the heroic chaplain of the Solidarity movement. And he would give these amazing masses for the fatherland, and 20,000 people would show up to hear him talk about the truth of the God-given rights of the Polish people and really expose the lies of communism. You know, this was after World War II. This was during communist control of Poland. Well, Father Jerzy continued to speak out, even though he knew that his life was in danger. In fact, his friends had told him for many years, go to the Vatican, save yourself. You are not safe here in Poland. And he just refused because he felt like he was on this mission as a courageous truth teller. Of course, he was hunted down by the communists. He was brutally tortured and killed. But in doing my research for this presentation, I made this amazing discovery, which was that his favorite saint, whom he learned about as a boy going to his grandmother's house, reading Knights of Immaculata, which was a newspaper that Saint Maximilian Kolbe founded. So he learned about St. Maximilian Kolbe going to his grandmother's house, and he was just a young boy. And when I made that discovery, it just made his entire life make sense to me. You know, you wonder, how does somebody have the courage to stand up there day after day, knowing that your life is in danger when you don't have to? You know, nobody was making him give these masses. This was his idea. He had, every option to turn down the opportunity to be the chaplain for the Solidarity movement. But he exhibited so many extraordinary acts of courage throughout his life. And knowing that as a young boy, he had learned about and started to love St. Maximilian Kolbe, and that St. Maximilian Kolbe was an inspiration throughout his life, among others, really just made his whole life make sense to me.
Incredible. And again, Maximilian Kolbe, 20th century saint who gave his life, took the place of a prisoner condemned to death at Auschwitz. And in the book, you spend a lot of time on Maximilian Kolbe. I mean, you're really focusing not just on these three saints, but you do a deep dive into the saints that inspired them, again, to heroic greatness. Let's kind of tick through them, if we could, starting with Joan of Arc. And there's three saints that you focus on in the book. I mean, I'm not kidding, Kimberly. I didn't know a whole lot about Joan of Arc before. But next to only Jesus, she may be the most interesting person to ever live. I mean, she's just an amazing, amazing life. Why did you pick Joan of Arc?
First of all, I knew that Joan needed to be in this book. I just kind of knew it in my heart. But I have to tell you, I was terrified of St. Joan of Arc. I was terrified to write about her because she is this ginormous figure. And there's so much information out there about her. In fact, there is more known about Joan of Arc than any other human being that ever listed before her. So you have her trial transcripts, you have the transcripts from the interviews with all of the witnesses people knew here. So there was an enormous amount of material to go through and then to decide what makes it into the book. She also is just such a mysterious figure because, she's visited by these three saints, one of them being an angel, Saint Michael the Archangel, and then these two teenage martyrs who were martyred in the early 4th century, as a result of the Diocletian persecutions. Well, again, just like Father Yergi, when his life started to make sense, when I realized that St. Maximilian Kolbe was this great inspiration for him, the same thing happened with St. Joan of Arc, because Joan was a teenager. She was 16 years old when she left her house for the very first time. And she was on this just absolutely insane mission. So her very, very first mission was to convince the captain of a fortress to give her an escort to travel 350 miles to go see Charles VII, the Dauphin of France, the rightful king, and convince him that he should give her an army to lead to drive the English out of France. Okay, so that whole thing seems so impossible, right? So the fact that
was there any precedent for this? I mean, were there other examples of teenage women leading troops?
No, there wasn't. There was this legend in France that France would be saved by a virgin. So I think she had that in her favor because this was a very well-known legend. But no, I mean, this was the 15th century. This was, we think of women now as, bold and courageous and, girl boss, and I can do everything. But this was not the case. In fact, one of the many little battles that she had to fight, before even going off and leading an army was she had to convince a judge not to force her to marry a young man that her parents actually tried to force her to marry. But marriage, as you know, is a sacrament in the Catholic Church, and it requires the consent of both people. And Joan did not consent to this marriage. Her parents desperately wanted her to marry, thought it was time for her to settle down. She was a simple farm girl, and they did not know what God had in store for her life.
The part that was so mysterious to me is I mean, men would go and they'd study for years, to lead troops. They'd study the art of warfare and all of this. And she has incredible kind of genius knowledge. I mean, of actually, choreographing and leading and planning out attacks and battles. I mean, and she was illiterate. She couldn't have read any books. I mean, it's hard to attribute this to anything other than just supernatural insight. Is that fair?
Yeah, and even secular authors and secular researchers who have looked into her life have basically said the same thing. Nothing else makes sense except divine intervention here. The fact that she knew exactly the moment when to charge, exactly the right strategy. She also always put herself in harm's way first. So she was always the first one to have to scale a wall. She was the first one to always to lead her troops out because she had complete confidence that this was God's will. And that is why she is such a good example, I think, for our young people today. We get all very confused about all of the earthly things that we want, measuring success on our own earthly and men's terms. But St. Joan of Arc was somebody who realized that really the only thing that mattered in her life was following God's will. And so she, might have been a little apprehensive at times when she was struck by the arrow. She realized it was very painful to be wounded in battle. That might have come as a little bit of a surprise to her. At first, she tried to keep going because she knew what her mission was. But in the end, she knew that all that really mattered was following through and doing God's will, doing what she was put on this earth to do.
How has she been interpreted differently? I mean, I'm thinking about, pre-feminist movement, Joan of Arc, is this hero. But like right now, she's taking on, in some ways, she kind of fits now for roles that have been newly embraced, I think, by women, in society. It's still new, like 50 years, 40 years that women have had access to a lot of sports and that kind of thing. I love your insight there.
Well, one of the reasons I think she is such an inspirational figure is because her mission was so unexpected, right? And we can see God working through her in very, very mysterious ways. You're right, though, that, in modern day, the feminists love to claim her, they're claiming her as transgender because one of the attacks against her, a major part of her conviction as a heretic was that she was a cross-dresser and that she was, worshiping witches, and she was into sorcery, and basically that she was doing the opposite of what she was doing, which was living her life according to Christ's wishes for her life, right? But yes, she has very much been hijacked by the left, because they don't understand that being faithful to Christ was the most important thing and the driving force every single step of her life.
And she would insist that her soldiers went to confession.
Yes.
And that I love that part. It was beautiful,
And she insisted that they not use foul language. And she wept, at the killing that had to happen because of battle.
Let's talk about Joan of Arc's death for a minute. I mean, it is horrific what humans would do to humans back then. And I almost had nightmares that night. I mean, and I've known that they do this, but the fact that just how slow this must have been, lighting a fire under her, and this was a long process, but she is faithful and is focused on Christ till the very, very end throughout horrific death.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, not only the fact that it did happen, but why it happened. It happened because a bishop was seeking power and was very angry that he had chosen a side, in the 100 Years' War between France and England, and he assumed that England was going to win. Everybody assumed that England was going to win. And he was mad. He wanted revenge at this girl because he envisioned himself being very high up in the hierarchy of the English Catholic Church. England, of course, wanted to claim France as its own and run France as an English area.
Wow. All right, let's move on. Next saint, and I can't get the name right, and I'm not even going to try.
Saint Jose Luis Sanchez del Rio.
Okay, fantastic. And a young boy, he's 12? Is that right? Or
he's 14 years old.
He's 14 years old. Okay, incredible story. And if you could maybe give our audience a bit of context for it. And by the way, Kimberly, we have an audience here, maybe 50-50 Catholic, not Catholic. And so some of this is all very weird because the story in Mexico, this starts off with missionaries being very unsuccessful. And then you have this dramatic apparition and conversion. Juan Diego's converted, and then he has this encounter. Can you share that story first? And you recount this story in the book as well.
I do, yes, because one of the inspirations for Saint Jose was Our Lady of Guadalupe and Saint Juan Diego. And if you're not familiar with the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, this was the way that Mexico became converted from a very pagan Aztec culture. In fact, it was the most brutal culture that had ever existed. It lasted about 100 years in Mexico, the Aztecs, and human sacrifice was a very natural part of the way of life of the Aztecs. They actually had quotas of a number of people that had to be sacrificed in each town with a temple. It was horrific. They would tear their hearts out and they would throw the bodies down into these awful pits. And they even believed that they would receive special powers, special gifts from the gods if they included children in their sacrifice. And by the way, the more tears that the children cried, the greater the sacrifice. What's really interesting about the child sacrifice that happened in the Aztec culture is it only happened with the consent of the parents. And this is so fascinating because when we think of Our Lady of Guadalupe, she is shown as a young pregnant mother. And, she is invoked as that patron saint of the pro-life movement, very much because, babies are not slaughtered without the permission of their mothers. And so looking back at the history of Our Lady of Guadalupe, when she appears pregnant to St. Juan Diego in Mexico, it's just some very, very interesting foreshadowing that's going on there. But if you don't know the story of St. Juan Diego, something that was new to me that I learned in doing my research is he was only a Christian for a matter of weeks. Understand that the zeal of a convert. So, he sees this lady appear to him. He recognizes right away that this is not somebody of this world. And, he really recognizes that she has been sent by heaven. He tells her, go to the bishop. I would like a church built here. So he obeys. He goes to the bishop, who, by the way, believes that, he has this zeal of a convert, and there's no way, right, that this vision is real. And there's no way that he really has been sent on this mission. He goes back to Our Lady. This is my absolute favorite part of the story. He says, send somebody else, send a nobleman, send somebody who is going to be believed by the bishop. And she says, no, my child, this is your mission alone. And by the way, that's something that St. Joan of Arc repeated many times on her journey. She believed that she was the only way to save France. And St. Juan Diego also is told, the only way that my will be accomplished is if you are the one to carry it out. So he goes to the bishop, after going to him. He actually visited him 3 times. He says he wants a proof that this really was a woman from heaven who was coming to visit, and this really was God's will to build this church. And he ends up coming back to the bishop, showing him flowers that, are not in season in the winter, that were growing up on Tepeyac Hill, which was impossible at that time of year. But most importantly, he is wearing a tilma, which is made of cactus fiber. And on it is this vibrant, beautiful image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, exactly how St. Juan Diego had seen her. And this is the same tilma that is preserved in Mexico today. And to get back to the story of St. Jose, at the time of this control of Mexico under Plutarco Calles, when he outlawed Catholicism, I know I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but there was an attempt by revolutionaries to destroy the cathedral that is the home to this tilma, and everything around it is destroyed. This revolutionary planted a bomb. It explodes, but the tilma is perfect. The tilma is untouched after all of these years. But to get back to the story of St. Juan Diego, after this story gets out, and after he's working with the bishop and they're evangelizing, after the visit of Our Lady of Guadalupe, 9 million Mexicans were converted in 9 years. And by 25 years, virtually the entire country of Mexico was converted from this very brutal pagan religion to Catholicism.
Oh. So I think about the young boy, and I'm still not going to get it right. The 14-year-old, as he's going to his death, he's invoking, Our Lady, Viva Cristo Rey, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Really, really powerful image. So this young boy, he fights for a group during this period, and he's too young to fight, but he kind of begs and pleads, and they let him in to be a part of this, and then he fights heroically, sacrificially. Gets captured, gets tortured. Why did you choose this young saint?
He chose me. That's, the simplest answer that I can give you. It's true. I'd actually came up with a list of 12 saints who were inspired by other saints, mostly just from the books that are in my house and the saints that I loved. But I never really made the decision what saint to write about next. And as it turns out, I had a word limit of 50,000 to 60,000 words. I completely underestimated how difficult it was going to be to tell the stories as fully as I wanted to. For example, to be able to tell the stories of what kind of an education these young people received in order to
Huh.
help them find the courage and live courageously for Christ out in the world. So his was actually the second chapter that I wrote, and it just really felt like the Holy Spirit wanted him in this book.
Incredible. And then Kimberly, the last one, and I've been hearing more and more about this priest, and I've been pronouncing it Jersey, but it's totally not right. How do you pronounce the name?
Jerzy Papiuszko. It took me about 3 weeks to get, and I'm Polish too, so it took me about three
Okay.
weeks to get this pronunciation right.
Okay, and he's blessed. He's not canonized yet.
He's
That
blessed.
will.
He's blessed, but the first time I learned about him, he was not. It was before the beatification process.
Wow.
And a
Okay.
dear friend of mine had introduced me to him and had said that visiting his gravesite in Poland was the most profound spiritual experience of his life. And this is somebody who had visited a lot of pilgrimage sites in Europe. So that really got my attention. And also just to see, how heroically he stood up for truth when there was so much fear in Poland at the time. So what was it that gave this also very frail priest? He'd had health problems his whole life. As a baby, he was baptized 2 days after his birth because his parents were afraid that he was not going to live, so they wanted to get him baptized. But what was it that gave him the courage to speak truth to the lies when so many other people were too afraid to do it?
Wow, incredible. And so he has this deep relationship. He's Maximilian Kolbe is a hero for him. What were the other influences in his priesthood?
Well, a really important one was Blessed Stefan Wyszynski. And if you're not familiar with him, he was such a force in Poland. He was the primate of Poland. And again, he was a cardinal during the communist occupation, the communist control of Poland after World War II. And the communists wanted to use the church for unholy purposes. And by the way, the exact same thing happened in Mexico, and there was a very courageous bishop in Mexico who, similarly said, no, if we have to, we're going to shut down the sacraments, which they did for a period of time, in order to protect the church from being used as an instrument for evil, right? So the communists in Poland were trying to do the exact same thing. And Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski absolutely refused. They really thought that they could manipulate him. But time and time again, he kept speaking out, giving these courageous homilies about the rights owed to all people as human beings made in the image and likeness of God. So this is a theme that really, really animated young Jerzy. So Jerzy first learned about Cardinal Wyszynski when he was in high school. He was a teenager, and during this time, he continued to learn about St. Maximilian Kolbe and read about his life. But it was at this time that he also discovered the homilies of Cardinal Wyszynski. And he just was so animated by them. He knew he wanted to be a priest, but instead of going to the local seminary, which is where everybody expected him to go, he went all the way to Warsaw. And the reason he went to seminary in Warsaw is because Cardinal Wyszynski was the rector there. So he ended up learning under Cardinal Wyszynski and training under him.
Kimberly, I got to ask you this question. I was just thinking about this as I was reading the book and that chapter. You give a pretty in-depth, accounting of kind of Polish history and how ferociously they held on to their Catholic faith and their own history and heritage. And then it's kind of like after they basically won, then they kind of become indifferent to it within a generation or large parts of the population, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It was like you couldn't pry it away from them. Nothing on earth could pry it away from them. It was incredible. The way that and you talk about the education and how extensive kind of secret schools were to preserve both Catholicism and Polish heritage. How does that happen? It's a depressing question, but do you have thoughts on that?
It is depressing. Well, the Poles for many, many years were these expert preservers of their culture. And Poland, by the way, was founded on Catholicism. So they consider the birth of Poland. They actually call it the baptism of Poland. So that was actually one of the great contributions of Cardinal Wyszynski, was he celebrated the millennium. It was the millennium celebration, which just happened to land, during the occupation of Poland by the communists. So it was really this brilliant way to remind the Polish people what their roots were. But you're absolutely right, because time and time again, and generation after generation, the Poles had to fight to pass on their Polish heritage and to pass on their Catholic heritage to their children. So, for example, St. Maximilian Kolbe. So St. Maximilian Kolbe was born during the 123 partition of Poland, and he was born in the Russian-occupied part of Poland. So Russia, of course, wanted to wipe out all of Polish culture. They took over the schools, they installed Russian teachers, and the Polish people had to send their children to these schools. Well, the response was to make sure that they were giving their kids a Polish education at home and a Catholic education at home. So, fast forward years into the future, and now we have, the Soviet-influenced communist state in Poland, and the exact same thing. So 2 years after Jerzy Papiuszko was born, the communists take over the schools. They make it illegal to teach your children outside of the communist school system. They impose this Marxist curriculum that is going to be taught across the board. And what do the families do? They pass on their beliefs and their culture and their heritage at home. Like you said, they have a secret network. Stefan Wyszynski's family, the exact same thing. Their families were a part of these, secret schooling, the secret schooling network, and they made sure that they were able to raise their children to have very strong Polish and Catholic beliefs.
Kimberly, final question for you. I read this book, and I'm thinking about, these are extraordinary individuals who did extraordinary things, inspired by other extraordinary saints. But for a lot of folks, you don't get a chance to to fight the English or lead troops into battle, like this, or, be 14 and to stand up against the commies and all of this. I think in some ways, upon reflection, like for most of us, our lives are fairly mundane, compared to these great saints. What does it look like, for the, soccer mom, soccer dad, or whatever, to live a life of heroic saintly virtue?
Yeah, I would say that if anybody who's listening to this who's thinking, "Wow, I just don't have a lot of opportunities to practice courage in my life," I don't think that that's actually true. I think that they're probably turning the other way and probably avoiding opportunities. We are living in a post-Christian culture. We are living a culture that, not only confuses vice and virtue and good and evil, but demands universal celebration of evil, of, eternal truths that have always been understood by human beings, because the truth is very much written on our hearts. Every single day, we have opportunities to do something courageously for Christ in the world. The difference is that the saints in this book, they found those opportunities early on and they never stopped. And the Holy Spirit kept encouraging them to be going out into the world to inspire others. And I think that those of us who are looking around and thinking, well, I live this kind of a boring life and, not much is really expected of me, I just don't think that's true. I think, in this day and age, we're getting a lot of advice from Catholics, from conservatives, to kids, keep your heads down, get a good grade, don't cause any trouble. You want to be successful in business, don't stick your neck out for others. That is the worst soul-endangering advice that I can ever imagine. That was also another inspiration, because I have noticed really good people and some people I really admire giving kids this advice. And if you are a kid and you're going to choose the easy way out, and you're going to side with lies when you know that the truth deserves to be stood up for out in public life, there is no way that as an adult, you are going to be able to pass on these truths to your own kids and help others in society the way that Christ has designed your life to be a part of it.
Wow. Yeah, we're here with the one and only Kimberly Begg, author, attorney, speaker. Kimberly, where do folks get the book? Where do we go?
It's available at tanbooks.com. It's on Amazon, and it's also on my website, kimberlybegg.com, where I have a 17-page companion study guide that can be used for homeschool curricula and family discussions and school curricula and just personal reflection.
It is so inspiring. It is a great read. Again, I truly could not put it down. Kimberly, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for what you're doing as well with both Run with Saints and the Catholic School Playbook. Maybe a word about those each before we close, as just kind of as a refresher. We've had Michael Ortner on. Run with Saints, is this kind of a social media kind of app to connect young 20s, 30 Catholics?
Sort of, but no. We want Catholics to live offline in community with each other. So it is a platform, it is online, it is a way for people to find each other, but the platform itself is not the community. The platform is the community builder, so that organizations that are holding events can get the word out about wonderful events that they're hosting, so that individuals can organize, special events and find new people in their own community, so that they can find good Catholic schools, so that they can find employers, and that people can live just out in the world together in community. And then Catholic School Playbook, which is another project of the Ortner Family Foundation, is something that I've been involved with since the founding of the project. This was Mike Ortner's wonderful idea, which was, there's all these amazing schools that are involved in the renewal of Catholic education right now. All of them are doing, some things extraordinarily well. Like, let's share all of this. Let's share the best practices of those thriving Catholic schools that are out there that are really reclaiming the Catholic intellectual and sacramental traditions and are building these robust communities of learners.
Love it. Again, folks, before you forget, order your copy of Unbreakable. It truly is a great read. Kimberly, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jeremy.